Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Josette Souza. I am the Senior Demand Generation Manager here at Integ. Today's workshop is dedicated to making sure that your solar GADs are successful in May and they're not rejected. We have presenting today Amit Patel, our Managing Director. He'll be walking through some really great kind of detailed technical aspects on making sure your GAD submissions are successful. We actually just had a wind version of this workshop, and we have that recording if you want it. So let us know in the chat and we'll be happy to share. All right, go ahead and next slide, please. We wanted to share two exciting opportunities before we get started. One is the Power Community that we are launching next month. This is the world's only private community for power generation professionals. It's 100% free to join, and it's based around tactical learning, peer sharing, in-person and virtual events. We already have dozens of folks signed up for the waitlist, and we are fully launching next month. So if you want to join, we'd love to have you. It's powercommunity.io. We will put a link in the chat if you're interested in joining. And it's something that's really exciting. It's the first of its kind. So we'd love to see you there. We'll do next slide, please. Finally, we have a workshop coming up that's a kind of a sister workshop to this one. It's with HSI, which is the energy industry's leading training organization. They've been around for decades at this point, 30 plus years working with power generation professionals, and they're going to train you on how to train your team. So it's a little bit of a train the trainers workshop. This workshop is very technical. It's for the people actually doing the GADS reporting. And then this workshop with HSI is more on how to get the rest of your team on board. It's a team effort with multiple stakeholders. So how do you get everybody on board? We'll share the link in the chat, but you can also use this QR code or email me as well for any questions. Before we get started, I do want to just share that if you have any questions, feel free to share them anonymously in the Q&A segment at the bottom of your screen, or you can also send it privately in the chat. If you select host and panelist, you'll be able to share your question privately or publicly if you select everyone. So with that in mind, I will hand it over to Amit and he will get started today. Thanks for being here.
All right. Hey guys, great to see everyone. I've done a bunch of these and, always get some similar and some different questions. So as you guys have questions, please don't be shy. We'll, walk through them as they come. If not, you can ask some questions at the end. Today I do have kind of a hard stop at around 45 after the hour, so I'm going to try to get to this fairly quickly. But there'll also be a recording afterwards in case anybody has questions. So we're going to break this down into 4 parts. Number 1 is, okay, so the whole goal is May. We want to make sure we have good submissions, right? So before you have good submissions, you have to make sure you're in the NERC ATI portal, you have everything set up, you have your certificates, and you've done your unit configurations and stuff and gotten something. There's a couple of IDs that are going to be important. I didn't add this in my presentations before, but it's actually been a bit of a pain point for folks. So I want to walk through it. Really, the meat of this is going to be the performance and the events, right? Because this is what you need to create to be able to submit to NERC. And the submission is quarterly. You're going to need this by May 15th. If you've done this, and this right, then this is just a formality. You're just going into the portal. But to simplify, I want to break it down into the 4 steps. Now, a little bit about Integ. We're in multiple continents, Europe, US, and within North America, or Europe and North America. Within North America, we do Canada and the US. We have a ton of blue chip clients from, ISOs to the largest utilities, to cooperatives, to very small generators. And we have our solution called PowerGADS that automates and simplifies all of this. But today, we're not going to touch any of that. Just want to let you guys know we have that. The rest of this presentation will not, talk about any of the Integ tools. We'll talk more about how to do this for you. And if you do want, if you're interested, you can reach out to Josette or Adam, or there's a couple of folks that will be mentioned that you can reach out to. And what we generally do is we hook into Pyro SCADA and we'll automatically do all of the GADS reporting. So it'll include creating the NERC tickets, creating inverter level outages and the synthesis. We actually do this in real time as well for clients, but this is more for GADS. And Pyro GADS works for fossil, wind, and solar. Today, I've done sessions on both traditional and wind. Today, we're going to focus on the solar and really there's a new performance record, new event record, plant subgroup definitions, new export files. Depending on your size, you had to do all of this last year. For the folks that are 20 megawatts and above, you're going to have to do this year.
We actually got a question in about this.
Sure.
Given the new requirements, are people actually going to meet this deadline? It seems like there's a lot of work and not a lot of time.
So when we did this last year, almost nobody was ready on time. It does take some time. Generally, most clients, it's taken them up to 3 months to kind of do this properly. I've also seen folks there have been a bunch of folks that have come to us, they've done it internally and it was all actually, especially the event parts were all incorrect. So what I would say is, yesterday was the best day to start it and please pay close attention to the events because you can try to do this, but to do it properly so that you pass compliance, there is a good amount of complexity and it's way more complex than the traditional GADS or the fossil GADS. So just please make sure you start as soon as possible. And just that most folks they're not ready. I don't know if folks are waiting till the last minute or whatnot, but in my experience, most folks just are not ready and they often need extensions or it goes down to the wire. So all right, and that's a great segue into this slide. You really should have started collecting data and doing all of this in January. So you should have hopefully done 1 month and soon you should have February. The deadline is May 15th. We're here today. There's not a lot of time. So hopefully everybody started. If not, please start as soon as you can. And if you need help or assistance on any of this, we do provide no cost assistance. You don't have to buy anything. I've helped probably maybe 12 to 13 utilities in the last year, or generators, I should say, at least. Some of my folks have helped people as well. So if you have questions, just, give them to us. We're happy to help. You don't need to necessarily buy our solution. So, all right. Now, the key areas, like I talked about, you have to do the portal and the configuration first. Then the suggestion is you do performance events, because this is easy, a little bit harder. This is going to be the hardest thing. And if you've done 1, 2, and 3, this is going to be easy. And the actual work is in doing the performance and event stuff. This is all more, just setting up at OATI. All right. So let's talk a little bit about setting up at OATI now. You're going to need first access to the application. There's some mechanics around it where you need to get an SSL certificate and those things. Usually somebody internally will handle this. Once you do that, you're going to submit some configuration information. I'll show you that. And when you do this, you will get back, you'll submit plant and other information and you'll get back plant and subgroup IDs. And those are going to be needed in your files everywhere. So you can start, but you won't be able to submit, even if you have everything ready, you'll need these 2 IDs. So make sure you go through this process. If you guys have any questions, you can reach out. I didn't want to take too much time and walk through it in this because, different folks are at different steps. They may or may not be ready. But if you have any questions, just reach out and we'll work with you. Again, it's no cost assistance. Typically, it's a 30-minute call that we'll set up. And if we need more, we'll move it to an hour call or just set up a separate 30-minute call. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what I was talking about with the configuration files. There is configuration data for plants, inverter groups, energy storage groups. And this is specifically for solar. If you have wind, it's going to be a different animal, but it's going to be very similar. And then once you have this, you'll get some IDs that are needed in the performance files for inverter groups. And if you have, a hybrid solar unit, then you're going to need this. If you have standalone battery, none of this matters. You don't need to submit. But if you have a hybrid unit, if you have solar only, you only need plant and inverter group. If you have a hybrid unit, you need all three. And then once you have these every month, or you're going to create these, and then quarterly, you're going to submit the performance and event files. So this is a one-time thing, the configuration files. These files, performance and event files, you will be submitting, quarterly to NERC. So, all right. I really won't go into the details of this, but these are, the different configuration files. Now, NERC has two ways you can do these. You can actually just get the templates, upload the templates. When you upload the templates, please note that a bunch of the IDs you are not going to have. And even if you go into the NERC portal, you won't be able to put those in. That's okay. Most people stop at that step. It's by design. You do not need to have those IDs. When you do it properly, NERC will go ahead and give you, they'll auto create the IDs for your assets and give you those IDs for, the different inverter groups and plant groups, etc. So, and if you have a hybrid unit, solar with a battery, then you're also going to need to do this one. If you don't have a solar with a battery, you don't need to worry about this one. You can skip it. So, all right. So we're going to talk about two things today, right? Events and performance. And from just high level complexity, events have a high level complexity, many areas of struggles. Performance is going to be, I'd say, medium. And really what I want to caution, when folks came to us after having issues or they just didn't want to do it internally, we found almost everyone was doing the events incorrectly. So just, if you take anything from this, even one thing, is just look at this and do it properly. It's a lot more complex than it seems. All right, so let's start with performance. If you look here, this is the data that needs to be sent in. Now we're going to start with the low-hanging fruit, static values. Entity ID, plan ID, you should have these IDs already from NERC. Report period, this is going to be the month and year of each one. And then you're going to have the availability status. Generally, these are going to be available. If they're not available, then you don't have to worry because everything's going to generally be 0. And then, the assumption is you're not inactive, mothballed, or retired. Again, if you are, then you don't really have to do much because a lot of these are going to end up being 0. So, we can knock these out very quickly, very easily. They're all pretty much static values. So next we're going to move to generation.
We did get a question in.
Sure.
Where are we supposed to get the underlying data from?
So for, depending on where this data is, right, you'll have this in your either Pi system or your, or some sort of SCADA system. So some people will have it just directly from the SCADA system or control system, and then it's moved into some sort of historian. Generally, we'll grab it from that historian tool. So you can talk to your IT and or whatever operational folks, but there should be reports and things that come out of there that you guys can use for this. So hopefully that helps answer the question. But yeah, so if you look at number 7, this is going to be the gross generation. So This is for all the inverters in the group. Remember, if you have only one group, it doesn't matter. You're just, or one inverter group, you're summing all your inverters. If you have two inverter groups, then you're just summing this inverters within that group only, and that's the generation. The net actual generation is the energy exported to the grid. So I'll walk through that a little bit, but this is the generation of the inverters, and this is going to be the net energy exported, and we'll talk about how to get through that in a little bit. Then you have the net max capacity, and that's going to be the max AC generating capability at the inverter boundary. Generally, that's a static field. Technically, you know, we could say ambient or something. It can change a little bit, but this is static for everybody that I know of. And then you're going to get the plane of array, monthly plane of array, which is the total monthly irradiance. Here, just check the, you know, unit of measure. This is what they want it in. So you just have to sum up and get that information. Now, if, you know, depending on how your plant's set up, right, you may not, every inverter is not going to have, you know, irradiance measured. So just get the closest one to that subgroup, and you can figure this out with engineering, you know, how to do this. So, but should have at least one. I've seen ones where, you know, that subgroup didn't necessarily have one right there. We had to use the closest one. So, all right. So now when we talk about the generation, so think of inverter group A and B, right? And A has just two inverters. We're going to call them Bill and Bob, and B has an inverter called Rita. So the gross is going to be for subgroup A, it's just going to be the sum of what you read from the inverter for Bill and Bob. And then same thing for Rita, it's just going to be whatever Rita, the values for Rita for that month. Now, for the net, it's going to be actually what the net comes out to be between the two. And then since you actually need, you only have one net for the plant, what you can do is proportion it based on the generation of each of those to get the net for that individual inverter group if you don't have that, you know, based on how yours is configured. And if you have questions on this, you can email us. Once I explain it in more detail, it's generally pretty easy for most folks to get this. Next, we have two items that are going to be a bit engineering heavy. One is going to be the performance ratio, and second one is going to be the expected generation. Now, for performance ratio, this is calculated using, you know, the DC capacity, power capability, and actual AC power delivered from the inverter. You can go into this yourself and review it, but it's basically kind of an adjusted based on, you know, temperatures, etc. And there's NERC says there's generally one way to do it, so your engineering folks can review it. When we do this, typically, you know, this is already calculated by most folks. If not, you can get the underlying data and calculate it, but it is a bit of a bear to do because it involves a bunch of data for it. Now, expected generation. Again, this is going to be the generation expected at the data point level and rolled up for the inverter group for that reporting period. So it's going to be based on solar day hours and daily energy produced per hour summed up for the month. And if you look at this, it's the irradiance, you know, times the reporting period, temperature correction, panel efficiency factor, inverter, times the you know, internal loss. So I can go into this a lot more in detail. I have a lot more slides that I can send if you guys have questions. NERC also has a lot of this data on the site and the DRI. So, but again, for both of these, I would suggest performance ratio and expected generation. Have your engineering work with you to do these. these are probably the toughest ones to do out of everything. So
We had
all right.
a question come in about what about if we don't have 5-minute data?
So looking at, you know, the language from NERC, and this gets into kind of, you know, legalese, but it says, you know, it doesn't say you should. So I think the goal is do the best that you can. I have a bunch of folks, most everybody we work with are doing it at least every 10 minutes. So I'm hoping you have 10-minute data and you can use that. And this is again, only my or Integ's interpretation are legal, is that they said that it does not mandate. I think it's based on the language, but you can double check with NERC. I believe 10 minutes should be fine as well if you don't have that 5-minute data. But definitely, I would say try to do 10-minute data. Anything else may not be very accurate. So, all right. Next, we have a bunch of hours, like there's, you know, day hours, night hours. For that, you're gonna need to go to NOAA, and they have a nice Excel if you go to their site and you plug in the latitude and longitude in it. I know this may be hard to see, but then it gives you all the actual when is sunrise, when is sunset, and between sunrise and sunset are your day hours, and it changes every day, and it changes based on, you know, your latitude and longitude. So you can go to NOAA and get this, or if you need help, then, you know, you can just email us. We can work with you and get you this. And what we end up doing is we just, we don't need the name really. We need the latitude and longitude, but when we create this, we just put the name in if it's, so it's easier. But for each date, we calculate, or we get the data and we create a table that has sunrise, sunset, and we also calculate the day and night hours. So you can easily use this for your purposes. It'll simplify a lot of what we're going to do after this. So just let me know if you guys have any questions. Hopefully you have this or you have an equivalent of this. If not, you know, just let us know and we can help you guys with this. So again, this is a little bit of info on the resources. You can include Adam, email Adam or Josette for that solar day or any other table. You can also, you know, sign up for other master classes we have, and, you know, complimentary one-on-one assistance if needed for any of these types of items. All right, so let's walk through this. What are the active solar hours? Number 13, okay? This is going to be the subset of active hours during the solar day. So if you take the month, right, you're gonna have, you know, let's say 744 hours within the month. Let's say it's January, you have 744 per inverter, right? If you have 10 inverters, you're gonna have 744 times 10, just 7440. Those hours are broken out into day and night, right? So these should always, day and night for each day of, you know, the month and year you're doing should end up 24. Summing these day hours, that's why I said this table is important. That is what's going to get you the active hours during the solar day. So hopefully that's clear enough. Now we're going to look at active inverter hours. Now, what that's doing is that's essentially just saying that, okay, whatever month I'm on, however many hours that I have in that month, I'm going to multiply the number of inverters that I have, right? And based on that, I should be able to get the calendar hours. If I have 744 calendar hours, right, which is 744 normally, but I have 10 inverters, so it's 7440, then, and I have no inactive hours, right? And inactive means I'm not none of the inverters are in inactive reserve, mothball, retired. Then I can assume that that entire 7440 is the active, right? So then from that active, we're going to get the night and day, which, you know, we already talked about. So that 7440 will be split between, you know, these two numbers, and you can get that from your tables there. So again, the active solar inverter hours, they're going to be here. And then once you have that, we're going to look at service inverter hours and these other values. So if you look at the inverter, right, you're going to have really two states where the inverter is on or off. If the inverter is on, you're going to have two states. One is where generation is 0, and one where it's greater than 0, you're actually generating. Now, if it's 0, then you're going to have resource unavailable, right? This is similar to the Ruth for wind. But for NERC purposes, they have you break those into day and night hours. And again, you can use that table we spoke about to get into day and night hours very easily. Now, the times that you're generating, this is going to be obviously during sunlight. And when you have that sunlight, it's still, I guess when you're generating, it's still having you break this down. I'm not sure why, but it's having you break this down into these, you know, values. I'm guessing you're not going to get much here, but this is where you're going to get a bunch of the values. All right. And again, we need that nifty table for the solar hours to be able to do this. So yeah, hopefully everybody got this. I think this is the key to doing the performance. It's having this table and understanding, you know, you have two states, inverter on and off. These are all going to be for inverter on, and then we'll look at the other ones where we have inverter off, and that's where we're going to get the different types of, you know, outages really.
We had a question come
Sure.
in. So we don't have to worry about nighttime hours when there is no sun?
So you do have to worry about it. That is the biggest issue that we're seeing from everyone. You can have faults. So I have a bunch of folks that just don't look at this when there's nighttime. I've had folks that just didn't even, you know, do any of the work during the night, but you can have faults, and folks have had faults at night. So you actually have to look through the entire 24-hour period. I know it's a little bit complicated, but something, even though you're not generating at night, if you get a fault and that inverter is down, you have to break it, say that inverter was out, right? At night. So yeah, please, 24 hours a day, you really have to look at this stuff. But yeah, so we were talking about the inverter on state. Now we're going to talk about the inverter off state. If the inverter is off, right, you really have two conditions where units available or unavailable. Now, if the unit's available and the inverter is off, that means it's going to be here, right? And then if it's unavailable, you're going to have maintenance, no maintenance. So this is reserve shutdown. This is different from, you know, the solar unit being unavailable, right? So this is, you know, yeah. So, and then here you're going to have maintenance and non-maintenance. Typically what we do is we just start with everything and say, okay, let's just get anything where we're in this, that means there's some sort of outage. We don't know if it's forced or planned, we just know it's an outage. And we grab each inverter level outage, and then we classify it. Now, for us, we do all this automated, so often we can just go back into the ISO, you know, because most folks have to submit these into the ISO, or we look at the fault, the different codes to determine whether something was done planned or maintenance. And then we can automatically just say, okay, I have, you know, 30 or 80 outages this month for the inverters. And we can say which ones were planned and maintenance. Then everything that's left is considered forced. Now, somebody can go through it, but if it's automated, then you can be pretty sure that it's forced. But again, please keep this in mind. Just start and get all the outages. And when we say outages, right, we want to make sure that it's a full outage for the inverter. If it's a derating, we don't care. Doesn't matter if you're going down to, you know, 5% available, NERC doesn't care. For the purposes of this, the entire inverter has to go down, not the entire plant, but the entire inverter. That's what we care about here. when we're capturing this. And you're going to need, while we only care about forced for events, you're going to need to capture these anyway, because you know, this will be important later in events, but this is important to capture the number of hours. All right. So again, the last thing I want to say is that with performance, all your hours have to add up. If you only had one inverter, it would be 744 between all these green values. If you have 10 inverters, then you'll have, you know, 744 times 10, which is 7440. And all these must add up. And please check the decimals. You know, most folks start doing this to 0.1 decimals. We end up doing it to, you know, it's like 0.05, whatever, 2 decimals, right, to the hundredths. But, you know, if it's an issue, just do everything to 0.1. And then what I tell folks is that there's no way you can have something that's over by 0.01, 0.05, 0.09. It doesn't matter. You can just pick a bucket and put it into reserve or something, you know, because, and also for most folks, they don't have a simple way to calculate the reserve. So reserve is what's left over, you know. So if you did all of these and you subtracted 744 minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever's left over can go into reserve. And if you've done everything else properly, this should calculate correctly. Obviously, if you haven't done this properly, then this stuff's going to be wrong. And then by virtue of, you know, math, this is going to be wrong as well. So just, it's a quick tip. If you guys have any questions, just let us know. We can help with this as well. So, all right, let me know. Any other questions, Jazette? If not, I will go ahead and move on to events.
Nope, all good.
All right, thanks. All right, so for events, here's the suggestion. Get this data from SCADA or Historian, wherever you can get the data. At a minimum, 10-minute granularity. Clean the data. So what happens with this is that often there's what I call, what we call IO events. So you're going to have places where there's COM failures. So you have to fill those in. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but often we use a bunch of other tags to see, you know, whether something is just out and you're not getting data, and then we can fill in zeros. If something's not out, what we do is we just create an event called, you know, inverter out, and then, or comms failure, and let the user review it and just make sure there's nothing else that can be done. Other than that, we're not able to do much, but we do a decent amount of cleaning of the data. There's also something called chatter, where sometimes like a switch will just go on, off, on, off, on, off, and we have logic to remove that. Hopefully you're not going through that internally. If you are, then it's going to become a much difficult task. Then what we do is we detect the individual inverter outages. And I say forced outage, we generally detect all the outages, and then we group them into, you know, forced, maintenance, and planned. And then we go to the next step, which is synthesizing the individual inverter outages into NERC outages. So keep this in mind, right? Events only start when the total force loss is greater than equal to 20 megawatts. They end when 95% of the max loss force capacity for that event is back. And it's less than, you know, 20 megawatts of that loss force capacity. So again, under that 20 megawatts, how much is lost? And generally, this is for per loss per cause code. I'll go into this a little bit later, how this works. NERC has changed their guidance on this, you know, within the last month. So I'll walk through that a little bit. So again, for purposes of this, we only care about forced outages, right? But like I said, we generally get inverter level outages. We try to get rid of these, and then only these are left. So, you know, if you don't have a way to get rid of these, then you're gonna have to manually classify these, right? And then go into these. Generally, if you have a simple way to get to only these, that's great. Most folks don't, at least when we do the automation, because we're automating everything. But for us, we use the ISO and other outages to figure out when these were happening. So, all right, so collect outages by inverters that are forced. And remember, full outage for each inverter, never a partial. We don't care for partials in all of this. They don't matter for us. All right, so a simplified way is get the 5-minute data, or let's say 10-minute data. You're going to get, AC switch status, DC switch status, the different inverter level generation, the plant net generation, irradiance, recloser status, inverters online. There's, I think we end up getting about 30 different things for the automation for your purposes. And a lot of these are per inverter. So if you have, let's say you have 20 inverters, well, you're going to end up, with 20 times a lot of these tags. So I have bigger units where I have over 1,000 tags total that we're looking at for every 5 or 10-minute period when we do the automation. Also, like I said, there's a lot of communication failures and other issues. So we use other systems to cross-check. And it's not just maintenance or plan, but sometimes some of these other tags don't come in properly, and you have to backfill using other tags and check things. So just please keep that in mind. It's really important to have backup tags that you're using to validate other tags as well. Once you have the outages, again, you're figuring out whether it's planned or maintenance versus forced. And really what we want to do is distill all the forced ones. And what we want to get to is looking at, synthesized GADS events, right? So you're going to have all these different inverters, and this is how long it's happening. Down is the depth, depending on, what size the inverter is. I know I have different values here. Generally, you're just going to depth-wise, if you're in a group, they're all going to have one, capacity for each inverter. It's going to be similar. So just the length may vary and this is the start and end time. So once you have all these inverters, what you're going to do is you're going to put them together, and then you're going to have something that's, that tells you where you go below 20 megawatts. And then the event's going to start at 20 megawatts, right? Which is fairly easy for most folks. But if you look at the different inverter events versus the NERC event, it's not very easy and it's not simple. You can't eyeball it. You can't often do it in Excel. You can do the start, but the end is the one that's difficult, because if you start here, let's say it's a 300 megawatt unit, and assuming that this is all forced, right? The first 20 don't count. You get to 280. And if you keep having this, you don't know when the event's going to end, right? Because it ends at 95% of the lowest point. So if everything ended here, then it would be 95% of this 20 megawatt, right? But here it keeps going. You have 60 megawatts, right? So at 60 megawatts, this is going to end when you get to 297. Remember, here it would have ended at a different one, right? So this is the problem with all of this, is that as you keep going and you keep adding, the end where the event's going to end changes. So this is why I strongly recommend you do this with, in some sort of automated way, using a tool such as ours or Excel or whatever your IT can write. Definitely not something that we suggest doing, by hand. Also keep in mind, if you have a plan or maintenance event, it doesn't count. None of this counts. You still have to make sure you go forced below 20 megawatts for it to count. Again, we'll talk a little bit about cause codes, but you have to understand why, each item is out and code it. Or a lot of folks are just using general high-level cause codes, which is okay if you're not able to tell 100%, but NERC doesn't have that many cause codes for solar. So hopefully you'll be able to, use information. What we've started doing now is we're mapping the fault codes from the underlying, and they're different for each manufacturer, and we're mapping them to the actual codes so that users literally have to do nothing. We can automatically map everything, and nobody has to even do any cause codes for NERC events. But if you don't have it, you may. So go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Do you want to finish that thought?
No, go ahead.
Last workshop, we had a question come in that I wanted to raise here because I think it's a good question, and that's how do communications failures fit within all this?
So yeah, I think like I spoke about, you have to account for them and you have kind of two paths. Either you can look at the data and fill in and say, you know what, this is just like zero or it's going to continue in a specific state and ignore it. Or if not, then you have to raise, what we do is we call it uh, communications failure event, or kind of call IO event, and then let somebody look at them manually and see, because you have to at least make the users aware that they were out, and then somebody can look at that manually and see, and make an estimation. Most of the times for us, this happens when just the inverter is out or something, or a bunch are out, and we just don't get data, and we're able to fill it in with zeros because we know, what the other inverters are doing, et cetera, and we can deduce that this thing isn't online, so we can figure out, hey, it's still out. All right, so the other thing I want to point out, and I'm going to hand this back to Josette soon, is that events can be ongoing, right? So be very careful, and changing something historically, if it was off or wrong, or Josette, like you said, because you had communications issues, changing something in the past can change the future, because if you change this nadir, then it changes this, right? And this could be across multiple months. So be careful that, and if you ever change anything in the past, like in our systems, the most complex part of what we built, the automation, is actually, if something changes, then the entire future has to be recalculated, and you have to check that. So please keep that in mind. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but if you ever go backwards, then you really need to redo everything going forwards to be safe. So, all right, Josette, I'm going to hand this off to you at this point. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending. This has been a great session. We just want to remind you that if you are interested in learning more and joining our private community that's 100% free and is dedicated to just power generation professionals, then check out powercommunity.io. Aditya will post the link in the chat one more time. And Amit, if you can do the next slide. Great. And then we just have another call out for our next workshop. This is with HSI. They will be training you on how to train your team. So the folks, today hopefully got a really great in-depth look at some of the technical aspects, but it's a team effort and there's a lot of stakeholders. So how do you get all of the stakeholders fluent in GADS, let's say? So that is coming up in next month, and we'll also repost the link to that as well. And to the final slide, Amit. If you want to automate your reporting and you're thinking, oh, Solar GADS is a whole lot to do, in the next few months, we're happy to help. We did share some free resources. Please reach out to us to get access to that, or free like a mini consulting session. We're happy to assist. But if you're also interested in just getting a demo and seeing how automation can work, please check out the QR code on the screen, and Aditya will also post the link as well for the demo on the chat. So it looks like there's no more remaining questions. In that case, we are going to thank everyone for joining today and for your attention. And if you have any questions at all, even if you're not even sure what your question is, reach out. We're happy to help in any way that we can.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Take care.